advantage of the opportunity. But right now is about right now.
The Plan B, Ohio State Buckeyes!
Give everything you got in your heart to this place.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rushing the Field, National College Football Show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we are getting close to actual live college football. Week 0 is around the corner, and then week 1, which is loaded with a bunch of meaningful games. Very excited to see. Joshua, how are you celebrating or enduring the last few days without football back in our lives?
Well, football is always a celebration. Big sicko here. Like, I watched a lot of NFL preseason just to kind of whet the appetite, which I don't even know why I do that, but here we are. I've been watching a ton of tape. We've got a second child that is due here next week. So my life is going to be really hectic, but there's nothing wrong with that. I'll sit my son down with me. I'll have my new daughter with me, and we'll watch ball together. We'll make it a family affair.
It's funny you mentioned the NFL preseason too, because I feel like that is for college football sickos. Like, these are our guys. These are the guys trying to make the team.
100%.
So that is very exciting. Also excited for you being a girl dad and for another little girl to love college football. Very excited for that.
Yes. I mean, you got to start them young, right?
100%. I'm around if she wants to, play around with like a microphone and pretend to interview people. Happy to help. Let's talk about the upcoming season. We've got a couple of news and notes we'll get through, and then we're going to do previews for the Big Ten, the ACC, and Notre Dame, who's quasi-ACC. In today's show, we'll do SEC, Big 12, and the Group 5 next week. But before we get into our conference by conference breakdown, a couple news and notes. Let's go through the AP poll. Finally, officially came out. It looked pretty similar to the coaches poll, which we broke down last week on Rushing the Field. But part of what's exciting about the AP poll, Joshua, is your girl's a voter. So we're showing you on YouTube my ballot versus the official AP preseason top 25. Pretty similar. I'm a little higher on Clemson than the rest of the voters were. But for the most part, it's kind of a crapshoot. You have no idea what you're doing at this point in the year. You have some advanced metrics and predictive metrics. But there's still like so many quarterback battles that haven't been decided. We do know that Alabama's quarterback is going to be Ty Simpson now, but you look through the top 25, there's a lot of question marks or ors right now. But this is the official poll. Texas is the AP preseason #1 team for the very first time ever, which is pretty crazy. And the AP voters, which I'm proud to be one of for this reason, they did it right and they got Penn State at #2. Ahead of Ohio State, and then Clemson, then Georgia. So, Joshua, what jumps out to you? And first of all, you can congratulate me on becoming a voter. You have to agree with all of my takes and not argue with me, because I'm going to be getting enough of that from the internet.
Well, I'm still going to argue, but big congrats to you. It's awesome stuff. I saw your side-by-side comparison on Twitter, and it is really intriguing to get the mind of the voter, because to your point, like, you have the metrics that you can look at. You can look at last year, but there's so much change and turnover in college football right now. It's really hard to lean on how teams finish like you could in the past. So it's intriguing to see where people have kind of slotted all these teams out. I think that everybody's kind of figured out maybe where they would tier teams to start, but like within those tiers, it's interesting to see where you would place them. I saw that stat about Texas being ranked #1 in the preseason for the first time. And that is insane considering that program and their history and how popular they are and what they mean to college football. So I think they're going to be really good this year. Obviously, a lot of people do, so it makes sense. I am for the Penn State over Ohio State. I just think there are less questions about them right now. And I think you are more right on Clemson than other people are too. And we mentioned that in the last show. I think they're going to be a really good football team. I think people are kind of maybe over Dabo and maybe think that he's lost his fastball. I'm not exactly sure about that. I still think that they could put together a pretty special season here. So I don't have a lot of gripes about the AP top 25. My biggest gripe is when people are going to refer to how teams were ranked at the start of the year in week 8 of the college football season. You can go to hell with that. But outside of that, I'm cool.
And I think too, when you're doing it and filling out a ballot, it's so hard to do after like 10. Because I think there's some teams that you're like, okay, I'd feel really good about them being like number 18. That feels like a good place to start. And you're like, but I got 7 more spots I got to fill before I get there. So that's really hard. And you do see that you kind of like Tennessee was in the playoff last year.
Right.
I think they downgraded at the quarterback position. I've got other questions, but like I had to fill out 25 teams. So they're in there. And then all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're like, okay, I've got 10 SEC teams. So SEC folks are like, oh, see, this is why our league is the toughest. And then it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy throughout the year when you start.
Because Nebraska could end up being better than Tennessee, and nobody's going to give them the credit because Tennessee started off in the top 25.
So that part becomes difficult. But again, when you're filling it out and you're trying to get to 25 teams, it becomes a lot harder than you realize once you actually sit down to do it. You're high on Clemson. I'm high on Clemson. Spoiler alert, we will get to them a little bit later, and our picks for ACC champion will probably reflect that. Before we get to our conference previews, though, an interesting name, former coach, actually, I guess 2 former coaches, kind of threw their names into the hat and said, like, I would like to coach again. Jimbo Fisher, national championship winning coach, who, by the way, if I was getting paid like $70 million not to coach, I would not want back in, but Jimbo does. And Jon Gruden also said he would love to coach in college football again. What do you make of these proclamations or these manifestations that we're getting?
I think coaches are naturally sick people, and they struggle to stay away from the game of football. I think this is like the most natural thing that you can hear. Now, does college football have the appetite for Jimbo Fisher? I'm not sure that a team that is, ready to win today is like Jimbo is going to be the guy that I want. Maybe he's got to do like what Rich Rod did, kind of go back a level and prove that he can build the winner like he has in the past. And then maybe people will be ready for more Jimbo. Jon Gruden, super interesting. Got a lot of commentary about him. Like, I think he's a great football mind. Does college football necessarily need him? No. I'm sure he's one of those guys, though, that would be really intriguing because of the media background. And now what you have to do in terms of talent acquisition and in terms of fundraising, like he's a guy that would move the needle from that standpoint. But ultimately, like it is, I feel like this is like the sun rising. Coaches that are not coaching saying that they would love to coach and that they have a lot to give to the game of football.
It's fascinating to me to think about Jimbo Fisher because he and that Texas A&M team were kind of the poster children of NIL the first year. It didn't work out. Throwing money at players and buying the best roster that money can buy did not automatically mean wins, did not mean chemistry. Those guys left Texas A&M. And really the last impressions we have of him in this era of college football was like that fighting with Nick Saban over NIL and athlete compensation. So that's really interesting if you're going to walk back into that world. But also, I would just like to underscore the point that we end up talking about in December every single year. The NFL folks love to be like, oh, nobody wants to coach in college football. A lot of people want to coach in college football. We saw a lot of NFL names get back into college football. We have GMs that are very engaged in Andrew Luck and Ron Rivera. And then, of course, Bill Belichick, who we'll get into in just a second.
They told us the sport was going to hell in a handbasket, Nicole. They said that nobody worth a damn would want to spend their time dealing with what college football coaches have to deal with. And it seems like it's as good of a place to be as it's ever been. It is.
Even when it's changing, even when you have to worry about roster construction, it's still pretty great. And part of that, a big part of that, is because of the actual players, the actual coaches, and the games themselves. And they're finally right around the corner. So we're going to do a football preview. So we don't need to really talk about the existential crises around the sport or playoff expansion or any of that. We're going to go league by league. We're going to talk about contenders. We're going to talk about the hot seat coaches. And we're going to talk about the biggest questions. We're going to make our picks, championship picks, offensive, defensive player of the year picks, and predicting coach of the year, which is actually one of my favorite preseason things to do because you're trying to project like a team that takes a step or does something that we don't know for sure that they're going to do. So we're going to start with the Big Ten Conference. We will be covering a lot of these games on NBC Sports. We did a spring trip. We visited a lot of these campuses. We spent a lot of time with these coaches and players in Las Vegas at media days. Joshua, let's start with the contenders in the Big Ten Conference. We're both high on Penn State. Ohio State's not going anywhere.
Yep.
Illinois brings back almost everyone from a team that beat an SEC team in their bowl game, won 10 games last year.
Yep.
Let's talk about the top tier. How do you see it?
Yep. So you mentioned Penn State, Ohio State would put them in there. Oregon has to be in the mix. And they're going to be a question, much like Ohio State, of, can they replace the quarterback production? Do they have the right team coming back? Can they kind of remake the magic that they had from a special locker room? I thought Oregon had a really special locker room a year ago. So that's going to be a question. Then Illinois is kind of like the team that everybody is high on. It would have said they were a dark horse in the spring. I don't think it's that anymore. I think people know exactly how good they can be this year. And then you ask the question, do you draw the line there, or do you put a team like Michigan in that top tier that is a real contender? Do you feel like Nebraska is in that tier that's a legitimate contender? I look at Nebraska as a team based off of the schedule that could be right there at the end of the year. And if they can pull off an upset in a big game, who knows what can happen for them. So that's the question to me of where the line is. I think there are 4 teams that are certainly like cemented in that top tier contenders category. And then what do you do with the team like Michigan? Are they above that line, or are they just below it?
That's exactly where I am on them too, because I think Bryce Underwood is going to be a phenomenal college football player. I think he's going to be a phenomenal quarterback. But you also just lost 2 first half of the first round, guys from your defensive front that really dictated games. So we always expect that Michigan's going to have future NFL talent on the defensive side of the ball, but you got to kind of wait and see and watch it emerge a little bit at some of the key positions there. So I'm with you. I would not be shocked if they were a lot better than they were last year. They were an 8-win team that peaked at the end of the year, of course, with the win over Ohio State and then Alabama, with a lot of the guys that we're going to see on this year's team. Right. But they have not named a quarterback yet. They're going to be thrown into some big situations early, that Oklahoma game in week 2. So I'm not putting them in that tier right now. I think they're in the tier right below it, which is where I probably would put Nebraska, maybe even Iowa as well, with the way that the schedule falls.
Iowa's got a quarterback. We saw the 5-yard out route and 2 million views on that. Everybody went crazy. They got a quarterback. 10 million
views. You sent it to me when it was 2 million. It's like 10 million views. Iowa fans dying for a quarterback who can complete a pass. But Mark Gronowski could be the real deal. So they're kind of in that group of, like, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw them reach the Big Ten championship game or get close to the college football playoff picture based on their schedule. But I think I'm with you. I think it's Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, and Illinois as the group of teams that I expect, the Big Ten champion to come from. And some sort of pairing of those 4 teams will play for the Big Ten title. The big question, of course, for Penn State is, can they get over the hump of Ohio State? I think even if they beat Oregon in week 5, I think they're still going to need to beat Ohio State to really change the perception of Penn State under James Franklin. Their record in those top 5 games, even if Oregon's in the top 5, it's still not like the gold standard that they have been trying to compete against and to chase and have not been able to beat. And I think that's the one where if they're able to do it, which you don't know if they're able to do it until the clock hits 0 and it's over and they've done it, that's really where you can change your perception about them as a national championship contender, but certainly in that top grouping of teams in all of college football.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that conversation about, like, we kind of need to see it. Can they do it? Because for the longest time, that was a conversation on a guy like Kirby, where it was like, can he beat Nick Saban? Can they actually win a title? And then all of a sudden they start winning at a really high level. Same thing with Ryan Day last year. Like, he lost to Oregon. We sat here and we were like, is this kind of going to be the same story? Is this going to be one of those teams that was like super talented, but in the games with the narrowest margins, they couldn't get it done? That's where James Franklin is today, where we have watched time and time again where he can beat the teams he's supposed to, but in those biggest matchups, he's fallen flat. He's got a great roster. He's got 2 coordinators that he really likes right now. This would be the time to really figure out if it's going to be same old James Franklin or if he can take that step like we've watched other coaches do in the past.
And this is the model we've seen in the Big Ten the last 2 years. The best players, your veteran guys, the established players, some of the best players in the country decide to come back and run it back and try to win it all. And that's what you got with Drew Aller, Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton. You lost Tyler Warren, but you still have the nucleus of this offense. You went out and added some receivers out of the portal.
Got better at that position. Yep.
Can only go up from there, right? The big storyline with them was no receivers caught a pass in their game against Notre Dame. And you would like to think that a wide receiver is actually going to catch some passes. And that's been a focal point and a weakness in this offense for a couple of years now. So we will see if they can address that and kind of create more options and more areas to defend. But I'm with you on the coordinators. We talked a lot last year about how excited we were about Andy Kotelnicki, and then we wondered at times if it was like a little bit too gimmicky, like were the plays being strung together in a great way. But he is a great football mind. You bring in Jim Knowles, fresh off a national championship, a great defensive mind. When we were there in the spring, they were talking about talking to each other, and giving each other scouting reports of what they have when they've played each other. But also just, hey, we see this, or here's a way to attack this, which I think is really beneficial for Penn State. And I think there's so much excitement and anticipation around this team that I do buy into as well. And it's going to, again, come down to 2 games in the regular season, Oregon and Ohio State. But in the meantime, they're very good at taking care of business against teams that they should beat. Anything else you want to add on the Ohio State, Oregon, Illinois part of this tier?
Yeah, I mean, the Ohio State, Oregon thing, just to touch on it again, like, I think we all trust the coaches. We all trust the roster composition. There are legitimate questions. Dylan Gabriel for Oregon was the perfect quarterback, super veteran, was a guy who had played a ton of football, was very good at controlling his emotion toward the game, right? Like he was always under control. And when you have a young quarterback, and this can be the same thing with Ohio State, it becomes a bit of a question. I look at Ohio State on defense, and I look at their defensive front. I think their top line is going to be extremely talented. There is a legitimate question about depth, in particular on the interior of that defensive line, that they have to get figured out. So as good as these teams can be, talent-wise, from a coaching staff standpoint, I have more questions about those 2 teams than I think the general public does.
I think that's fair. Also worth pointing out for Ohio State, new coordinators. So you're elevating Brian Hartline. We spent time with him in the spring, and he talked about being more ready to call plays, like to actually, kind of fully embrace the offensive coordinator position than last time. But also Matt Patricia coming in after his stints in the NFL, and just the way he's been able to connect with players and instill different things defensively than what they did under Jim Knowles. That's going to be an interesting storyline as well. And again, another NFL to college person worth pointing out there as well. So I'm with you. I mean, they're going to be talented. They're going to be greener than we're used to seeing for Ohio State. And that's what happens when everybody comes back, and you kind of like some of the clocks when you're mapping out, like these people are going to be eligible or they can go to the NFL this year. It changes, and it does stymie some of your development for some of your younger guys. And I said that to Ryan Day. I was like, oh, that's kind of the problem that you have, but it's a good problem because all your guys came back last year. And he's like, yeah, exactly. You hadn't thought about it that way, but that is what happens when you're younger than you necessarily expect to be. It's not going to be like it was for Michigan last year, the year after their championship. But there could be certainly some growing pains, and especially with Texas in week 1, there might be some pain moments there for sure. Oregon going to be interesting with Dante Moore. I thought this was such a luxury at the quarterback position. You did not see a lot of guys that had starting experience somewhere else transfer somewhere knowing that they were going to be the backup. And he did that So he's been in that quarterback room, in that system, learning from Dylan Gabriel and learning what Oregon has and building chemistry with his players without starting. So I think, you're coming off of two most experienced college football quarterbacks ever in Bo Nix and Gabriel. It's going to be different with Dante Moore, but again, you're going to have athletes, you're going to have that intensity and the toughness and the physicality that we're used to seeing from a Dan Lanning team. He is still it's still eating at him that they lost the way that they did. I don't think he was joking when I talked to him in Las Vegas, and I was like, how do you kind of turn the page? And he's like, you don't. You wake up every day thinking about that loss, and I should probably see a therapist.
Yeah. But you love it though.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the energy that you have to bring. And for a guy who's seen a lot of success early in his career, like he has that mentality that he doesn't want to stop, and that we're not just going to say that, being 13 no Big Ten champs was good enough when you had a chance to make a run at a national title. And I think that resonates with the guys in his locker room too. And as you mentioned, you see it in the way that they play. They play extremely hard over there.
Extremely hard. I also think that it's very college football, very sports to have the losses sting more than the wins make you feel good. Yep. So that's where Oregon is. Before we get to some of the coaches and kind of hot seats that we're tracking on, give me your pick to win it all, the Big Ten champion.
I'm going with Penn State. I'm going to do that thing that I've not done in the past. I feel like in the past, I've been a guy who has done they've never done it, so they can't do it. And I'm not going to fall into that. We've laid it all out. They have the roster, they have the coaching staff, and this is their moment to step into it. So I think Penn State takes that step and they're going to win the Big Ten.
I also think Penn State is going to win the Big Ten. It's the same reason that you do. Yes, it's hope right now. It's hope that it will match up to what they look like on paper and to what they're capable of. It's hope that Drew Aller is not going to throw a bad pick in a big moment, and that he will grow, that he will continue to step forward, that they will figure out the receivers and have options for him to throw the ball to. But I do believe it's kind of, if not now, when, right? And I think that they will be able to close that last gap. And yeah, I'm not going to wait and see if they've done it and just default to Ohio State. I'm going to pick the Nittany Lions here. Let's go into some coaches that probably need to win some football games this year. As you look at the Big Ten, there's a lot of coaches who've only been in these jobs for a very short period of time. There's not a ton of turnover. I mean, Purdue made a change last year, brings in Barry Odom. So you reset the clock there. Are there coaches on the hot seat in the Big Ten? I want to start there instead of just naming some. Is anyone on the hot seat?
It feels like Lincoln Riley should be, but we know that the buyout is a real thing out there. But I don't think anybody expected them to be, what were they, a 7-win team last year? Like, I don't think that was the expectation. That wasn't nationally. I don't think it was for their fans or their boosters. And that's a proud program. And I think that they need to take a step this year for people to feel really good about Lincoln Riley. Like, if he's not on the hot seat, if they have a bad year, he will be next season. That's kind of where it's at right now. The other one that pops into my mind is my guy, Luke Fickell. And it's really unfortunate because this ain't the schedule to have to be in that question of, is he the right guy for the job? You look at who they have to play this year. It would be a miracle for them to pull off an upset or two to even get to a point where they win like 6 or 7 games. And that's really unfortunate. But the Luke Fickell at Wisconsin experience, I don't think has gone the way that anybody expected it to after his tenure at Cincinnati and what Wisconsin has been historically in the Big Ten. So those are the two names that would come to my mind if we're going to talk about hot seats.
Yeah, I agree on both counts. Although, again, I do think that buyout is prohibitive for Lincoln Riley. At the end of last year, it was over $90 million. It's at the point where they really have to make it work. And I know that they have put in a ton of resources and, he's put a ton of money into his defensive staff to help fix that side of the ball. They put a lot of like structural pieces around him for NIL and all the things that you need to do in college football today, the GM position, going out and poaching Notre Dame's GM for that spot. So we'll see there. I also want to mention Mike Locksley. He is coming off of a really rough 4-8 season. This will be his 7th season as the head coach at Maryland, which, kind of an inflection point typically when there's been ups and downs. And he's got a new athletic director. So we both love Mike Locksley, love the way he runs his program. They've had terrible luck with injuries a lot of these years. But I think that is a place and maybe a schedule to watch there, especially now that you don't have the Big Ten East. You have a more equitable schedule. I think people would like to see a step from Maryland.
Well, it's a really good point. And it was intriguing listening to him at Big Ten Media Days where he was like, I lost my locker room. I don't think coaches would ever admit that. And Mike Locksley is a guy who just tells it like it is. And I think that's why you and I appreciate him. That can't happen again, to your point. Like, that is not something that can happen for him at this juncture in his tenure at Maryland.
Any big questions when you look at the Big Ten in the entirety of the Big Ten? Any things, league-wide that you're watching, individual teams you're curious about? What are your question marks?
I mean, my biggest question is, at the end of the year, how many teams are we looking at in the playoff, right? Like we mentioned what that top tier was, but I do think that the second tier does become intriguing. And part of it is, will they look at schedules and kind of do what people hated that they did with Indiana, right? Like Nebraska, for example, that I've mentioned numerous times now, where it feels like things set up for them. Would that be enough? Like, could that be enough for them to be a 5th team from the Big Ten that would get in to the college football playoff if the other 4 teams that we mentioned do what they need to do? That's my biggest question, is by the end of the year, does the second tier of this conference really push to be talked about like people do nationally with the second tier of the SEC, where we're all whining that they got left out of the college football playoff at the end of the year?
It's a great point. That goes to just the general idea about depth in the Big Ten. Can it get deeper? I think that's a great question and something to track, especially when we talk about like the Nebraskas and Iowas and Minnesotas type programs in the conference. I'll also just throw out, hey, how does Indiana follow up the greatest season in program history?
Wow.
What do they do? How do they keep this and not make it a flash in the pan? I think Fernando Mendoza was the biggest transfer acquisition that no one's talking about. I think it's going to be huge for them. But what does this look like? What does the world look like? What do expectations mean and look like for that team in Bloomington? Let's switch gears and make our picks. So I asked you and myself to make Big Ten championship picks, offensive, defensive player of the year, and a coach of the year pick. Let's take a look at them and walk me through them, Joshua.
All right. So there we go. We got the graphic up for those of you who are watching. We already went through the champion. I said Penn State. Offensive player of the year, I felt like, I mean, everybody knows that it's Jeremiah Smith. Unless something happens where like Ohio State's quarterback situation is just terrible, or he has something unfortunate happen, in terms of injuries, like this is the guy. He might win the Heisman, right? Like he's that good at the wide receiver position. So that one was pretty obvious to me. Defensive player of the year, I went with Caleb Downs. This one also felt obvious, and it was a production last year, but you talk to NFL people and he is different. Like they view him differently than they've looked at other safeties. I also had a chance to talk to him at Big Ten Media Days. He's a football guy. I asked him the question, like, what's the difference between the Big Ten and the SEC? And he doesn't give one of those like, oh, whatever. Like, he's like, well, in the Big Ten, we see a lot more heavy personnel, 2 tight end sets, 12 and 13 personnel. We see fullbacks. I'm like, all right, like football guy answer. I thought about going with Coy Parrish for defensive player of the year. I think he can have a really intriguing season because he's going to play on offense, defense, and special teams. But you talk about safeties in the Big Ten between Caleb, Coy, and Dylan Thieneman. Really good players at that position. And then for coach of the year, I went with Brett Bielema. He's got the team that has like the expectation to they took the step last year, but to continue making that step. He knows how to win with less talent on Saturdays because he's a very good ball coach. And I think he's going to live up to the expectation that we've all set for Illinois football this year.
I have very similar picks. The only difference is I went with Nick Singleton as my offensive player of the year because I felt like if I'm picking Penn State to win it all, people, aka voters, are going to be looking at Penn State's roster about how to do that. And I feel more confident in Nick Singleton in the run game, even with splitting carries with Katron Allen, being that focal point than Drew Aller. But I debated all of this. And I also debated Jeremiah Smith because I do think he's the best offensive player in the country. And I think Caleb Downs is the best defensive player in the country. That's not always how these awards work. Right. And it will matter who wins the Big Ten. So that was part of the thinking for Nick Singleton. I also went with Brett Bielema as my coach of the year because if they're going to be the Indiana of this year, aka like the third or fourth Big Ten team to make the playoff and to have this season that kind of breaks through and is one of the best in program history, we're going to be talking a lot about Bielema and Bielema ball. So it's going to be Brett Bielema. Okay, let's go to a different conference. Let's talk about the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC. This was a league that has been making a lot of headlines off the field. We're not going to discuss like kind of the future of it and how long it's going to last. But I do want to talk about the top teams. Last year, one of the big storylines of the season was Florida State's demise, drop-off after a perfect season, nearly making the CFP. They go, and it was just a disaster. It can only go up from here. That's one of the top storylines. You have Clemson that we hinted at earlier, both very high on. Dabo finally dipping into the transfer portal, but also a program that did make the playoff and did do some things last year, bring back a quarterback in Cade Klubnik that are going to make them one of the best teams in the country. And people are very, very high on them. You've got Bill Belichick at UNC and the experiment that we're going to see there. Questions about, hey, can Virginia Tech ever be Virginia Tech that it used to be under Frank Beamer? So there's a lot going on in ACC land. I want to start with their tier of contenders to win the ACC title, to be CFP contenders. Joshua, I feel like we've got to start with Clemson.
Yes, Clemson is certainly in there. And you mentioned Cade Klubnik coming back. I think that's huge. It's a mixed bag the way that people look at him. Like, I think some people see him as more of a gamer, but maybe not like a ton of upside. And there are a lot of people that are like, no, this guy could be the best quarterback in college football. But they have him. I think he's really effective, and he's going to be good this year. Like, if I'd be shocked if he took a step back from the improvements that he made last year. The other ones that I would throw in there, Miami, which is still a question to me because Carson Beck, the last time we saw him on a football field, he was a roller coaster. He was just not great. But they're expected to be really good on the offensive line. They're expected to be really good on the defensive line. They made a change on the defensive side of the football, which was their Achilles heel last year. If it wasn't Cam Ward, that defense was going to let them down. So I'm not sure about them, but they're certainly in that contender part of the conference. I throw Georgia Tech in there with Haynes King, a super veteran guy who I think is a baller, a gamer, somebody who can win for them when it comes down to crunch time. I'd throw Louisville in there, Miller Moss and Jeff Brom. Like, it feels like a good marriage. He's a guy who has done really well in the portal. They've acquired some very good talent. And my line there would be SMU. I'm going to put them above the line. We watched what they did last year. I like Kevin Jennings a lot. I think Rhett Lashley is a very good ball coach. So I think that this top tier is a little broader here in the ACC. Clemson, to me, is clearly the head of that tier. But I think there are more teams that can compete to win that conference than what we just talked about in the Big Ten I'm pretty confident in this standpoint.
Yeah, I think the second best ACC team is very much up for grabs, and that's why you're kind of casting such a wide net there.
Yes.
Because to your point on Carson Beck, I mean, we saw really good Carson Beck, then we saw really bad Carson Beck. We saw a version of Carson Beck last year that would look like he was seeing ghosts, right? Like some of the mistakes that he was making and the interceptions. But if that gets shored up against and with an offensive line that Mario Cristobal always has dudes on the offensive line.
Yes, he does.
So the more protection there, maybe an improved defense, that would be great for Miami.
They should be better.
They should be, but it cost them so many great Cam Ward performances. It cost them the college football playoff.
It really
did. Defense that they had last year. So I'm cautiously optimistic on Miami. People are always going to wonder too, though, if it comes down to game management. You know, can Mario Cristobal make the right calls, push the right buttons, call timeouts at the right time to get them a win in a tight game? That's always a question. But yes, I would put them in that category. I would keep SMU there. They've done nothing to cause us to doubt them with what they were able to do last year. And then it feels to me like Louisville could be the SMU of this season. We both love Jeff Brom, know him well from his time in the Big Ten. And I'm with you on Miller Moss. I mean, like we saw what he was able to do with Tyler Shough. We've seen what he does with any quarterback he has.
I mean, he had Aiden O'Connell, who was a 7-string walk-on at Purdue, as an NFL quarterback, right? Like this to me feels like it's going to work.
I agree. And you also have two of the best running backs in the country. Like that's going to be a fun offense to watch and to watch it work. So I'm with you. I think that is the tier. I think Clemson is the obvious favorite. Clemson is the team that I'm picking to win the ACC. Not a surprise. You saw where I had him in the preseason poll, number 3 overall. But I think that the Tigers are back. We've wondered, like, hey, can Dabo adapt to college football in today's day and age? Yes. I think they're going to be extremely talented. I think they're going to have the best player in the country. The best quarterback in the country. And I think that they have some dudes on the defensive front that are going to be a problem for everyone in the ACC.
Yeah. The defense last year, to me, was part of the issue for Clemson in their ups and downs. They had the 9th-ranked defense in the ACC in yards per play allowed. That's not what their standard had been. When they were a team that was rising through the 2010s and winning championships in that time, a lot of it was because they had stout defenses. So to me, I think that's going to be a difference maker for them. I also have Clemson winning the ACC.
All right, let's talk about the hot seat as we look through the ACC. We just grouped a lot of schools in the mix of like possible contenders. There's also been some recent changes. Bill Belichick, for one, taking over at North Carolina. I think for the hot seat, I think we're looking at Virginia Tech in Brent Pry and probably Tony Elliott at Virginia.
Totally
Some of this is going to come down to the appetite for wanting to make a change and some of the calculus behind it. But these are two programs that are trying to make sure they are not falling behind in college football and where it's headed. Virginia Tech is still chasing its glory days. I really thought the Justin Fuente hire was going to work. I think there's like last year, there were some high expectations for Brent Pry. I mean, they were a lot of people's pick to be a dark horse in the ACC. That didn't come to fruition. And Tony Elliott and really just these coaches from the Dabo coaching tree, also high hopes, also high expectations. We'll get to Brent Venables when we get to the SEC preview. But I think to me, those are the two places that I'm watching for, you know, how they do, what the records are, how they're winning, how they're losing, and those head coaches.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think those are the two very obvious picks. The Virginia Tech thing too, I think for a lot of us who, you know, we had watched Michael Vick and what he did there. And like, even during my time playing at Ohio State, I lost 4 games, lost one of them to Virginia Tech, right? Famously. Like Beamer ball absolutely got us. And we went the next year and played in Blacksburg. You get Enter Sandman. And like, there's so much about that program that feels big and it feels like it's fallen into the background in the last few years. So they've got to get that right. One that I would ask the question for you is Dave Dorn, NC State. Like the expectations for them last year were very high and it was a huge swing and a miss. You know, is there anything there that maybe not hot, but is his seat maybe a little bit warm right now?
That's an interesting one. I think there's definitely some questions on like, hey, like, have we reached a ceiling? You know, I mean, there were a lot of those teams where they were sending a bunch of defensive guys to the NFL and like the Bradley Chubb era, and they would win like 8 or 9 games, right? Like they couldn't kind of get above that. So that's definitely interesting. I was also thinking about Mike Norvell. Sure. Not necessarily like hot seat, right? And there were people who were like, oh, you know, a 2-win season, can't bring him back. Yes, I mean, his buyout's enormous. And there's only one way to go from where they were last year.
I mean, they could win 1 game. They could win 0.
No, they're not. They're going to win more games.
I mean, like that was an autopilot coaching performance. 2 wins is like, that's insanity.
their personnel was bad, right? They missed on all the guys out of the portal. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't block. I mean, there was so much.
No, the roster construction was a flaw, though. That was a problem, and that was
that's on the
because
coaches.
but he relied on the portal and didn't have high school guys ready to go. And that's a question of, can he handle this era and building a program with how you have to do it now? It's got to be a true combination of grabbing difference makers out of the portal, but also having your guys ready to go.
Agree. So I don't want to say hot seat for him, but a situation to watch, right? Like, I mean, they need to be a lot better, which gets us into like some of the big questions in ACC land. I think, can Florida State bounce back from that drop off is one. What is the Bill Belichick experiment going to be like? That's maybe for non-diehard college football fans, like just general sports fans, that's probably the number one story in college football this year.
Yeah, and it was one of the weirdest off seasons too. It seemed like we had talked so much about things that did not necessarily involve football and that program and how he's building it, and like everything else about his personal life. So like, that was strange. But there is this question of Bill Belichick as a college coach, a program builder, a developer, and he developed guys in the NFL, no doubt. But there's also like this part of his NFL legacy that I asked a question of, and it's an unpopular thing to do, but he wasn't very good before Tom Brady. He was not good at all after Tom Brady. He took Mac Jones from a guy who was one of the best quarterbacks in college football and turned him into a complete scrub. Like, that happened. What's it going to be? Like, is it going to be this magic that we saw when they were winning championships in New England, or is it kind of the Bill Belichick without having the greatest quarterback that's ever touched a football experience?
Also, like, college kids are never going to be close to even the pro level, right? Like, they're more closer to a Mac Jones that you're inheriting versus Tom Brady, at his peak. So how does he handle that? Like the ups and downs of like the college kid element of this, that like, they got to go to class. Their girlfriend might break up with them. Like,
he knows young people, right? Like
and young people, right? The cultural.
He knows young. He lives with the young person, so he understands the mind of young people.
Jordan is probably the only person who might be more excited about the new Taylor Swift album than me. That girl loves Taylor Swift.
It's not a shock to me that you were able to bring Taylor Swift into this show.
It's honestly shocking it took this long because I
don't get it.
All right, we'll talk about that offline. But listen, I think like all of that stuff's going to be fascinating. But from a football standpoint, you're totally right. The last few years in New England were not good. He was not maximizing his talent. They weren't evolving to figure out their own strengths and weaknesses. They just weren't very good. And that's the last taste we have of him as a football coach. So how does he do it at North Carolina? What does the team look like? How do they play? He brought in all these NFL guys, right? Like, what do they know about the college game and how it's going to actually play out?
The last thing I'll say about him too, toward the end there in New England, he did an awful job of evaluating and acquiring talent.
Yeah,
and one of his superpowers was the fact that he could go to, some Division II schools pro day and find a guy that was going to become an all-pro for him. And it like bad first round picks. And he wasn't used to drafting the first round because they were winning so many championships, they would just trade out. But there were bad first round picks, bad free agent acquisitions. Like, it fell apart and he looked like a different guy than the glory days there in New England.
Yeah. And he wanted back on a sideline. The NFL did not want to hire him. So here he is. How's this going to work? It's going to be fascinating. That's, again, I think one of the top storylines in all of college football, but certainly within the ACC. And I'll throw one more in there, before we change subjects. How about Syracuse? I thought that what Fran Brown did last year was one of the more underrated storylines of the season, the turnaround, because there were bigger ones, right? Like we talked about Arizona State, we talked about SMU, we talked about Indiana. There was a lot else happening. But Fran Brown seems to be the perfect hire for Syracuse. Talk about talent acquisition and development. We saw all of that. They're going to try to do this again with a quarterback who wants a second chance, wants a bigger role. Well, maybe not a bigger role when you come for Kyle McCord, but for this situation, Steve Angeli coming from Notre Dame, where he did play sometimes, and he arguably saved the season against Penn State with that drive before the end of the first half ended. But I'm fascinated by them. I think the schedule's really, really tough. Like they're definitely going to lose more games than they did last year. But I love what's happening there. I love Fran Brown. I love the way he talks about his players, the way he's building his program. Like it feels like a really like important foundational year for him. And
Yes.
I'm intrigued by that. It's again kind of going to be a subplot in the ACC, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a realness to Fran Brown that I don't think exists for a lot of other coaches. Like he says things to the media in a way that it feels more raw than you would get from
Like
other
that he
people,
doesn't shower.
which I love. Like I don't deserve to shower. That's a football guy to me, and it's a weird thing to say in the media, but like that I think works. It works with players because that's how he talks to players, and I think players appreciate honesty. I think it's why a guy like Kyle McCord probably went there. Like there was certainly a connection geographically and everything, but like I think Kyle McCord wanted somebody to tell him like, hey, this is where you're at right now. This is what we're gonna do. We believe in you, but like we're gonna be honest around here in the way that we're gonna get you right. I'm glad you mentioned the schedule with them though.
Oh, it's
Because
brutal.
yeah, and last year it wasn't, right? Like it ended up working out for them to be able to take a step and build confidence as a program. This year, it's not going to be the same thing. And so I'm curious how they handle that and how Fran navigates his team through having a more difficult path than they did before.
Yeah, to recap this. So they open with Tennessee, but then they're at Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame this year. Those are the road games.
It's all the teams that I
is
mentioned as contenders
brutal.
in the ACC.
Yes,
pretty much.
100%.
So, like, here we go.
Speaking of contenders, let's see your picks. Let's do champion pick, offensive, defensive player of the year. Floor is yours, Joshua.
All right, so champion, as I mentioned, I'm going with Clemson. It feels like Dabo's kind of recaptured a little bit of magic. He's going to have to do it on the field, but it sets up for them. Offensive player of the year, I went a little bit off the board here. I took Kevin Jennings, the SMU quarterback. I like the way that he plays. I like the way he played last year. He had an awful game against Penn State. I'll chalk it up to the weather elements and him playing in the cold there. 23 touchdowns, 11 interceptions last year. If he can bring down that pick number, I think his production can go up even more than it did a year ago. Defensive player of the year, TJ Parker out of Clemson. I love him because he is a guy who is disruptive around the football. He had 6 forced fumbles a year ago. That's an insane number to me. I think the ball is the issue in the game of football. And I like guys who can separate man from football. That stands out to me. And then finally, for coach of the year, guy you and I talked about a little bit earlier, Jeff Brom to me is one of the more underrated coaches in the whole sport. He is a great offensive mind. They're a little bit chaotic on that side of the ball, which I like. He develops quarterbacks. He knows how to incorporate the throw game with the run game. And he's done a great job of utilizing the portal to acquire talent, some guys who maybe needed a change of scenery. I don't know if they end up winning the conference. I think they'll have a pretty good season, and people will be talking about him at the end of the year as a coach of the year candidate.
So our picks are fairly similar, at least in the same vein. I have Clemson winning it all, but I have Cade Klubnik, who again I think is going to be the best. Well, he is entering the year, he's the best returning quarterback in college football. But I think he is going to be arguably the best. We'll see at the end of the year. So I think Clemson's resurgence, them being back among, I think they're going to get a bye. Like I think they're going to be a top 4 team when the college football playoff rankings come out in December, and they're going to get a bye. Cade Klubnik is going to be a huge reason why, and the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, Peter Woods. We talked about just, again, the dudes that Clemson has. Star defensive tackle Peter Woods might be the best defensive player in the country. That is not Caleb Downs.
I agree with that.
So that's why he's going to be my defensive player of the year in the ACC. And I'm with you on Jeff Brom. It's funny. We both tried to zig a little bit to have like unique ACC coach of the year picks, and we both zagged to the exact same area. Is Jeff Brom and quarterbacks with great running back in a league that, there's a lot of room for potential. And I, again, think that they can be the SMU of the ACC this year. I think the schedule works well for them as well.
I want to jump back in on Peter Woods real quick.
Yeah.
That was the guy that I first gravitated toward for this award. I agree with your take that he is the best defensive player not named Caleb Downs in the United States of America. It's just a matter of the people who watch the box scores and look at the stat sheets rather than actually watching the impact on the game when it comes to these types of awards. That led me to a guy who's had maybe a little bit more impressive stats at times than a defensive tackle can get.
I agree. All right, let's hit on Notre Dame before we go, because they play enough ACC teams that this is a logical place to put them. Coming off an appearance in the national championship game, new quarterback, who we don't know it is yet as we're recording this on August 14th, Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr. A lot of reports from the local beat writers are that it is very close, and that obviously Kenny Minchie has a dimension that he can add as a runner. CJ Carr, big name, but coming off, he had an injury last year that kept him, away from actually being able to do a lot in practice. But it may not matter as much right out of the gate, because you're going to be handing the ball off to arguably the best running back in the country in Jeremiah Love. And you're going to have a lot of help around them, but they've got a monster of a schedule to start. Miami is the opener, and then Texas A&M comes to South Bend. They lost some of their great veteran leaders from this team from last year. But I think there's just a lot of overall enthusiasm for what Marcus Freeman is building. Certainly what Mike Denbrock is doing on the offensive side, brings in Chris Ash as a defensive coordinator. He returns to college. You and I know him well, spent a lot of time with him about why he wanted to do this, why he wanted to work with Marcus. So they're interesting. And I think we're going to, by the end of week 2, we're going to know a lot about Notre Dame. But this is a team, even with the losses that they took for the guys that went to the NFL or graduated, like they should be in the playoff year in and year out. The playoff is set up well for Notre Dame. But it's going to come down to a lot on those first 2 weeks, how whoever is under center handles those moments and the challenges that they face. But I'm still high on Notre Dame. I mean, they're in the top 10 in the preseason for a reason. And again, you still have some of the best players in the country, starting with Jeremiah Love.
I'm with you there. Jeremiah Love, would not be a shock if he was a Heisman finalist this year. He's that good at the running back position. And to your point, we've talked about this with other teams, young quarterback, you're going to want to get the run game going. And that's where they've been the last couple of years anyway, is they've been a team who's wanted to run the football. And I think they're going to be running behind a pretty good offensive line here. It was interesting because when we went in the spring and we talked to Notre Dame staff, one of the things that they told us was that the quarterback battle was very neck and neck. And it was all three guys. And it was Stephen Jelly at the time who was involved in that. Marcus said that he wanted to let him know by the spring if he wasn't the clear-cut guy so he can make a move. But it was a 3-man race, and now it's a 2-man race. So I will be intrigued to see who ends up coming out in the top of it. But one thing I thought was interesting, you saw the practice footage on social media, and CJ Carr is not in the stretch lines, and he's warming up by himself, and people are like, oh, that's a little bit different. And I look at that as a coach who does the right thing, right? Your quarterback maybe gets a little bit antsy sitting there stretching. He wants to warm up his arm and go through some throws instead of being there in the stretch line. You let your guy do that, right? You want him to be at his best. You want to get the best evaluation on him. And that's why I think Marcus and his staff are going to make the right decision in this case. But overall, I think this is going to be a good football team. There's still that big lingering question for me about skill on the outside and can they take over games that way? That's not something that they've been able to do the last couple of seasons, but top to bottom, front to back, offensively and defensively, it's going to be a pretty well-rounded group.
Yeah, I think they're now in that category where you expect talent-wise, the drop-off's not going to be that big. It's just level of experience. And a bunch of guys did get experience because of injuries last year. And so, you're hoping they come back, they stay healthy, but that should be a plus, right? For the offensive line, that a bunch of those guys are back. So it's going to be fun to watch. I think that I love the way that they scheduled this year. I love that we have these 2 monster games right out of the gate with Miami and Texas A&M. So I think we are going to learn quite a bit about this team. They're kind of part of that larger trend where a lot of these places, these blue bloods that are replacing quarterbacks with first-year starters have monster games where you're really going to see them tested right out of the gate. Both sides for Texas and Ohio State. again, Carson Beck at Miami, he's got stuff to prove in this one. So that part is going to be really fun because we're totally going to overreact to everything that we see week 1 and maybe be right, probably be wrong, but I'm excited to overreact.
I want to overreact so bad. Like it is one of the things that I desire most in the world is to have a strong overreaction off of week 1 games. For all the people out there who do scheduling, this is what we want. This is what the people ask for. I know folks are bickering over what the future playoff models will be like and what that means for their non-con schedules. The kids like it when you give us the good games in the beginning of the year. So let's continue this.
I completely agree. And especially home and homes. We love it. Put the games on campuses where they thrive, where they live. But yeah, that'll do it for our Big Ten, ACC, and Notre Dame previews. Next week on Rushing the Field, we'll have the SEC, the Big 12, and the Group of 5, Group of 6, technically, maybe. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but we will do all of that as we get closer and closer to the action. Happy week 0 week, which maybe it will be by the time you're listening to this. But for Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks for hanging with us on Rushing the Field, and we'll see you soon.